Appreciate so much all the effort and energy that John puts into directing, leading our worship. It makes all the difference in the world, and thank you all for joining in so heartily. It certainly encourages me and helps me get ready to get up and lead us in our time each Lord's Day in the Word. And I hope that you're excited about that. I certainly am, and I want to encourage you, if you want this morning, to turn over to Psalm 27, which most of those songs have been taken from, and which Caleb has already read a portion of to us. I'm not really going to do an exposition of Psalm 27, but it certainly provides the tone for the entire lesson, which has to do with confidence. Confidence. Are you confident? Maybe you were confident, but now you're not. I think all of us are going through life, and as we confront new challenges, things that we hadn't seen before, the confidence that we had in the past can sometimes just evaporate. And we find ourselves in this new situation, and we lose our confidence. And that's a bad place to be. That's a tough place to be. How many of you guys sitting over here or wherever you may be are going to be going into middle school for the first time this fall? Raise your hand if you're going to middle school for the first time. All right. I see some people doing that. How about high school? You're stepping up from middle school, now you're going to be in high school for the first time. Yeah, a few of those as well. That's something in my memory that triggers that sort of lack of confidence. I remember I sort of ran Bluebonnet Elementary School. I had things the way I wanted it. I was on the playground especially. I was often like the team captain. Things were going my way at Bluebonnet Elementary, but then when I stepped up to La Plata Junior High, it was junior high back then, all of a sudden all these other kids from all of these other schools in the area were there too. And I wasn't feeling quite so confident anymore. And I think that's the way that we go through life. You know, as we're young, Jarrett and I were coming in here. We've got this new habit where we're coming into the auditorium on Friday afternoon, and we're talking about our lessons that we're going to present and praying for each other and thinking about you and actually visualizing people who are going to be here in the audience and how what we might have to say could actually be an encouragement and build somebody up or challenge them in a way where they're at. And Jarrett just kind of made that point that, you know, as you're going along through life, you think when you're young that in just a few years, when you get just a little bit older, a little more established, a little more experienced, that you're going to have all the answers, your confidence is going to be sky high, and you'll never have reason to doubt yourself or doubt the situation, and that you have what it takes to deal with it again. But he says, eventually, you come to a point where you realize, no, because life is always unfolding something new. And that's where a lot of us are today. You may be 80 years old, but you've never been 80 years old before. You've never been a widow before. And no matter how much you've been through in the past, you're confronted with new situations that you've never encountered before in your life. And you can have a confidence struggle and wonder whether or not I'm going to be able to deal with this. You've never been a mom before. You've never been a mother of a teenager before. You've never been single before, or maybe you have been single before, but you've never been divorced before. You've never been the defendant in a lawsuit before. That'll rattle you. And so no matter who you are or where you're at, a college student for the first time, totally out far away on your own, or maybe out of college and now it's up to you to pay the bills. You've got to pay the rent, you've got to pay the insurance, you've got to put groceries on the table. Maybe now you've got a family that's depending on you, and you've never been there before, and you question in this new endeavor whether you'll be able to deal with it. Well, I think Psalm 27 establishes the tone that we need as we proceed in today's study. So let's just read the whole thing together again, beginning in verse 1. This is a psalm of David, and he says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the enemy assails me to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise against me, yet I will be confident. There's our word. One thing I have asked of the Lord, and that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will lift me high upon a rock. And now my head shall be lifted up above my enemies all around me, and I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing and make melody to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. You have said, seek my face. My heart says to you, your face, Lord, do I seek. Hide not your face from me. Turn not your servant away in anger, or you who have been my help, cast me not off. Forsake me not, O God of my salvation. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. Give me not up to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and they breathe out violence. Yet I will be confident. I will be confident that I shall, in this, that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong, and let your heart take courage, and wait for the Lord. I don't know exactly what it is that David is up against here. He is up against something. He's fighting for something. And sort of you can get the undercurrent that he's trying to boost his confidence because there's such a strong adversary coming against him that he has reason to be afraid. And maybe it's something he's never seen before, and so he's trying to build himself up. But it's interesting to notice the place that he goes to and where what he anchors his confidence in, or who he anchors his confidence in. Twice in this passage, he speaks of his confidence. I will be confident, and then later, I will be confident in this. And we'll come to that again in just a few moments. So I don't know exactly what David is up against this time. David is always up against something, and maybe that's the way you feel in your life as well. About the time you get one thing settled and feeling pretty good about it, the new thing that you have never encountered before comes up against you. And in David's case, it sounds like it was pretty rough, because he says, when the wicked came against me, when my adversaries came against me, notice, to eat up my flesh. That sounds pretty tough. His enemies weren't kidding around. This was for blood. This was for all the marbles. They are coming up against him to devour him, to destroy him, to eat up his flesh. And maybe you sometimes feel like the enemies around you, whether they're persons or whether they're forces that you're working against, whatever it may be, the voices in your head, the circumstances that you're encountering, these are great enemies, and it feels like they want to eat up your flesh. And you don't know if you have the wherewithal to deal with this enemy. And so David, in the face of this, does not just wilt. He does not just collapse, but instead he affirms his confidence. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. But notice verse 13, I remain confident of this. Of this I will be confident, that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. I'm rooting my confidence in the goodness of God, in the faithfulness of God, in the God who has always been there for me in the past. And even though I'm now planted in a new circumstance that I've never been in before, I'm confident That the God who has always been my support, my strength, my stay, my fortress, that God is going to continue to be with me. I'm confident in Him. And so the Bible never tells us simply to have self-confidence, to just look within ourselves and say, you've got what it takes, but rather always directs our attention upward to the rock that is higher than I and say, that's where my confidence is, and in this I will be confident. And so whatever it is, again, that you're facing, that is your challenge, that is your enemy, that is seeking to devour your flesh, say, this is where my confidence rests, and in this, in Him, I will be confident. Well, maybe you're listening to that and thinking, well, it would be great if I were David, or like Sterling was talking about this morning, there's so much in Psalm 27 that is messianic. There's so much about this that I can just put into the mouth of Jesus. And you say, well, if I were as great as Jesus, if I were as good looking and talented as David, if I had the support of a good family, then I would be able to have this sort of confidence. But I lack those things, and I don't have the validation of others coming my way in order to support me, in order to say, I will be confident. And there's no doubt that those are good things to have along the way. If you have external validation, if you have people in your life, or if you can just look to talents and skills that you were naturally born with and say, well, I have confidence because of this, or because of them, or because they believe in me, that's a good thing to have. And David had that at times in his life. It's true. Even when he had to run for his life from Saul, when he was seeking his life to devour his flesh, he had Jonathan in his corner. And one of my favorite stories in the whole David saga is when he is alone in the wilderness of Ziph and he is discouraged in spite of the fact that he was a strong and capable man. He was down, and Jonathan sought him out and found him alone in the wilderness, and it says that he strengthened David's hand in the Lord. You know, Jonathan had nothing to gain by being in David's corner, and actually he had a lot to lose. He himself, Jonathan, was next in line to be king, and he understood that if David is going to live, he's going to be the king instead of me. And he set all of that aside in order to be there for David. He said to David, I believe in you, and I believe in the Lord working through you and the promises that God has made about you, and you will be number one, and I will be at your right hand. And so he strengthened David's hand in the Lord. The Apostle Paul, a New Testament counterpart to David, also had at times people who were in his corner who validated him and gave him courage and strength. And I think particularly about the church at Philippi and the relationship, the very special relationship that he had with those people. You know, when Paul's cell phone would buzz, and he would look and see that it's a text from Corinth. He had to swallow hard. He knew this was going to be drama. And yet when the buzz came and he looked and it was from Philippi, that was good. And so it says in chapter 4 and verse 15 in his letter to them that he's writing from prison. He says to them that you Philippians know that in the early days, you remember the old days, the early days, way back when you didn't have anything, you didn't have any support, there was nobody believing in you, and you were setting out on a new venture, and you didn't have any clout or collateral. But way back in the early days of the gospel, Paul says, when I left Macedonia, no church shared with me in the giving and receiving except you. There wasn't anybody else in my corner. There was nobody else that had my back, but I know the church in Philippi that's been with me since the very start. Lydia and those other ladies down that we taught the gospel down by the riverside, and the jailer who washed and put salve on our beatings that we had received while we were in prison. You've been with me all the way since that time. And I'll tell you, it's the truth. If you've got a Jonathan, or if you've got the Philippians in your corner, if you've got somebody who's been with you from the beginning and saw things in you and saw the Lord with you and encouraged you and has been with you all the way, even when there was nothing in it for them, that's special. And that's something you want to hold on to, and those are people that you need to cling to. And you need to allow them to speak into your life words of edification and confidence. And you need to reciprocate that back as often as you can, because it is a great blessing. But as good as it is, it's not enough. It's not enough. Because at the end of the day, your confidence will only last as long as the source of its supply. Whatever it is that you're building your confidence on, anchoring your confidence in, your confidence will only get you so far or last as long as the source from which you're deriving that confidence. And if we're placing our confidence in the wrong thing, or in something or anything that can fail, eventually it will fail. David says elsewhere, even my heart and my flesh may fail, but God stands strong. David says later in this passage that we looked at, or we read a moment ago in Psalm 27:10, though my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Or as the ESV says, there seems to suggest, my mother and father have forsaken me, but the Lord took me in. And so even some of those nearest and strongest family relationships that we rely upon, and people who have been able to be there with us and for us in the past, that's not something that's necessarily permanent. That's not a supply, going back to our statement, that can be counted on endlessly and in every circumstance. Because Paul's going to find himself a little bit later as he writes to Timothy and say that at my first defense, when I stood trial in Rome itself, no one stood with me. I was utterly abandoned. I was by myself. There was no one else that I could borrow some confidence from. But he says, the Lord stood with me. And so if we want a confidence that cannot fail and is there for us in each and every new circumstance that we encounter, we'd better have tapped into the supply that is infinite resource, that never runs dry, that never gives up, that never runs away. I will never leave you or forsake you, says the Lord, so we may have confidence, he goes on to say. That needs to be the source of our confidence. We don't need to borrow confidence from someone who lacks the funds. It's a bad thing to have insufficient funds. It's tough to borrow confidence from someone who has insufficient funds. But when we are relying upon the Lord, He'll take us in. He will receive us when no one else will. And that's how David was able, in the midst of a situation where his enemy was coming in to eat up his flesh, was able twice to say, I will be confident, I will remain confident. Because early in his life, young people, David had developed the character trait of trusting in the Lord as the source of his confidence. You know the story of how he was the youngest of his brothers, and his dad gave him the job of going out and bringing food to his three oldest brothers who were fighting the Philistines in the valley of Elah. And so David comes bringing his bread and cheese to his brothers as the food delivery boy. And when he gets there, it just so happens that Goliath is coming out from the line of the camp of the Philistines and is taunting the armies of Israel and defying the God of Israel. And David just happens to hear this. And so when he sees that, he begins to inquire about what's going on. How is this being allowed to happen? Who's going to do something to shut this Philistine's mouth? Who's defying Israel and the army of Israel and the God of Israel? And he asks questions about it. And when he's asking these questions, his oldest brother, Eliab, heard David talking to the others, and he was angry. You see, Eliab already knew at this time that God had anointed his little brother, his runt of the litter brother David, as future king of Israel. So he's already angry and upset and jealous of this little brother of his who's now come up to the war front to see him, Eliab, not doing what he ought to have done, which is go out and meet the challenge of Goliath. And David's now there asking questions about why isn't anybody doing this? And so his first reaction is that he's angry. And then he goes on and he says to David, this is Eliab, David's oldest brother, looks at his little brother and says, "What are you doing around here anyway? What are you? Little David, why are you here? This is a place of war. What are you doing here? You don't belong here. This isn't the game for you. You're not up to this. What are you doing here?" He demanded. And what about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? You have your little responsibility, your little flock of sheep, and that's where you're supposed to be, far, far away from the war front. What is it that you're doing here? And then he pauses a second and he looks at David and he says, I know about your pride. Isn't it interesting how we project into others the things that are true about us? I know about your pride and your deceit. I know why you're really here. You act like you're just bringing food and supplies to your brothers and to getting news to take back to Dad about what's happening at the war. But I know why you're here. You just want to see the battle. You're not really interested in doing anything about it. You just kind of want to sit back at a safe distance and see the fireworks. You want to find out what's happening. And so he reads into his little brother the worst possible motives. He's angry at him. And so David, it's interesting, instead of getting engaged in an argument with his brother, get ahead of myself there, instead of getting an argument with his brother, continues to ask the question of what's going to be done for the man who does something about this giant who's mocking our God. And word gets to Saul, and Saul sends for David to be brought into his presence, and David shows up there, and when he gets there, Saul is disappointed. Because he's heard that there's this guy who's saying he'll do something about the giant, but when he sees him, he's just a young boy, young man. And he says, now Goliath has been a warrior from his youth, and all you are is a youth. You don't have the experience, you don't have the background, there's no way that you can have the confidence to stand toe-to-toe with the champion of the Philistines like Goliath. You don't have what it takes, and just like his brother said, you don't really belong here. And what happens next is really amazing. Because what David does is he begins to tell the king about something that has happened in David's past. A short past, because he's only a teenager right now. But he's already lived long enough to experience the power of God at work in his life in some lesser things that has now positioned him to be ready to face this new challenge. And the amazing thing is that he begins to give his resume to the king, and the things that he specifically cites as credentials that enable him to be ready to go face the giant are the things that Eliab, his oldest brother, used to mock him about. He said, I was out watching my father's sheep. Remember, Eliab says, little shepherd boy, why don't you go back and tend the sheep that you're supposed to be taking care of? He thought that it took him down. And David says, I'll take it. And I'll tell the king, I was out watching my father's sheep, and when I was watching them, a lion came in and attacked the sheep, and a bear came in and attacked the sheep. And when I saw them running away with the sheep, I attacked the lion. I attacked the bear and killed them. And now, this giant who is defying the armies of Israel will be just like that lion and that bear. You see, this is a new situation. And I know I've got an enemy that's ready to come up and devour my flesh. But I've already faced an enemy. And God stood with me and enabled me to do my job there. And He will do the same in this circumstance. And so you know the story. He goes out. Saul tries to give him his armor. He rejects that, collects 5 smooth stones from the brook, and then goes out to meet Goliath. And Goliath is now the third person to look at him and belittle him. First, it was his big brother. Then it was the king of Israel. And now it's the enemy himself. And he says when he sees David that he despised him. And he cried out, "Am I a dog that you would send out and try to beat me with a stick? Who is this little runt that you've sent out to stand and contend with me, the champion of the Philistines?" And once more he mocks David and Israel and the God of Israel. And then David responds to him this way in verse 45. "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. I don't come to you in the name of David, the accuracy of my sling, though I'm pretty good with it. And the Lord rewards those who have prepared themselves. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the Lord of battles, the Lord who commands angel armies. I come to you in the name of the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." That's where David draws his confidence. And he says to him this day, this very day, "The Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistine to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And then all the assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with the sword or the spear, for the battle belongs to the Lord, and He will give you into our hands." Is there anything in your past as you face this new situation that you're not sure that you're ready for, that you're not quite confident that you have the competency to handle? Is there anything in your past that maybe you had those same sorts of feelings of trepidation and fear and wanted to wilt and just give up? But the Lord stood with you, the Lord strengthened you, and you did overcome it. And now you can borrow the courage from past experience and trust in the Lord to give you confidence to move into the new situation. That's exactly what David does. And so here, back in Psalm 27, later in life, David is looking at each new challenge that he faces with that same confidence. Again, in verse 13, he says, "I will remain confident of this," or "in this I will be confident. In this I will be confident." It kind of reminds me of Lamentations, which if you're doing your Bible reading, you're doing your Bible readings, right? You keeping up? It's time to jump back in. If you've like, how are you going to be confident in this if you don't know what this says? And you read Lamentations and you say, "Well, I don't want to read a book about lamenting." And because you decided to skip Lamentations, you missed Lamentations 3:21 through 23, where he says, in the midst of all of his calamity, all of the trouble, all of the disaster, all of his fears and worries, he says, "Yet this," everybody say this, This, yeah, let's do it again. We can do better than that. This, I like that. Yet this I call to mind, therefore I have hope. Hope when nobody else could see a reason to hope. Jeremiah says, in the midst of my lament, I have hope because I call to mind. That's a decision. That's a decision when things are bad, when the situation is tough, when the giant is big. This is a decision of what you're going to recall, what you're going to retrieve from the past and bring to mind. This, he says, I will recall, and therefore I will have hope because of the Lord's great love. We are not consumed. For his compassions never fail, and they are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. He's drawing on an account that is not going to have insufficient funds. When he needs courage to stand in the moment, he will find an infinite reserve available to him to stand on, to give him hope, to give him strength, to face each new situation. We need to do the same. Because your mind, if it's anything like mine, it's like sitting right down here on Dishman Lane, where every time you decide you're going to go that way instead of around one of the other ways, you meet a train. Every time. I mean, just don't even do it, because 9 times out of 10, there's going to be a train passing. When you're sitting there at the train tracks and you're really up close and they're just zipping by, it's like that's what my mind is like. It's constantly got one thought after another zooming through it. This. And often it's, you can't do it. You're not enough. You're not up to the challenge. Who do you think you are? Or you're angry, or you're envious, or you're anxious, or whatever else it is. These things are just buzzing through your mind over and over again. And as they go by, finally, here comes that train with the graffiti written on it that says, great is his faithfulness. And you've got a moment in that second, the split second that car passes by to decide, that's the car I'm jumping on, and you're going to be a hobo and you're going to jump on the train. And you're going to ride the train with a car that says, great is your faithfulness. This is my confidence. This is the car for me. This is the one I choose to ride, because all of those are going to go through your head. And you're going to decide which one you're going to ride. And it makes all the difference. And that's what sets people like David apart from so many of the rest of us. It's not that he didn't have his low moments or those doubts, or that his mind wasn't as filled with fears and worries and concerns as yours and mine are. But he chose, he says, this will I remember. And I will have confidence because of this. And we've got to step up and grab that while it's passing by and make that our confidence. Because sooner or later, every other source of confidence is going to dry up. Sooner or later, every other source of confidence is going to dry up. If your confidence is in the fact that other kids like you, the day's going to come when a friend's not going to like you the way that you like them, or that boy's not going to like you the way you like her, or she's not going to like you the way you like him. Like, however that goes, you know what I'm talking about. If your confidence is totally dependent upon the fact that your husband compliments you and your good looks every day, or your wife shows appreciation to you every day for the things that you do, or on your skills and ability or your income, situation sooner or later is going to arise where there is no amount of money that can fix it, and no amount of money will another minute buy. And where's your confidence then? My confidence is in the Lord, and this I will remember. Our good looks, our athleticism, our abilities will fade. But if we will remember back, there's always a what. There's always a lion and a bear that the Lord enabled us to deal with in the past that will enable us to be able to stand in the present and face whatever adversary comes to devour your flesh today. I love the way Isaiah puts it. He says, even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar with wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. You know, when Paul wrote that letter to the Philippians who had his back from the very beginning of the gospel, when nobody else did, they were encountering some situations that were troubling for them. And I love the way in the beginning of that letter, he pays them back the favor, and he says, you know, I'm confident of this one thing. I'm confident in this. Of all the things I can think about of other churches that have flopped and other Christians who have failed, when I think about Philippi, I choose to remember this. I am confident of this, that the Lord who started a good work in you will bring it to completion in the day of the Lord. Where's your confidence? Where have you put your trust? Are you going to be able to finish the race that is set before you? That is totally dependent upon what train you choose to jump onto, what car you decide to get with. And you have every reason in the world to believe that the God who has been faithful enough to get you to where you are right now has what it takes to get you home to glory and to do whatever it is that you're called to do in this life until you get there. If you're not a Christian, we want to encourage you to come to that infinite resource where you can have a place to anchor a confidence that cannot and will not fail. We'd be happy to help you and study with you and anything that you need to do in order to form that kind of relationship and build that kind of confidence. If we can help you, let us know while we stand and sing to encourage.